So I don't need to do all of that again. We can just get straight into the conversation. This is a conversation that is part of a series called Together We Are Strong, where we're looking at increasing the dialogue and hopefully how we feel about talking about issues that might feel too difficult or contentious for us to really address in everyday life, things that impact our families and our communities, everything from marriage matters to gender roles, right through to the pointy end of domestic and family violence. And we're honored to have you join us today. I've watched many YouTube talks by yourself on these topics, or where you touch on these topics, and we thought that you would be a wonderful guest to start the series off.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and no worries at all about the technical issues yesterday. It happens a lot, so I appreciate the invitation and being a part of the conversation. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Well, if I was to ask you, I could give you statistics about the epidemic that is violence against women globally. And I think that happens every year. Every year there's an international campaign in November to end violence against women. And then every March we come back and we celebrate International Women's Day and achievements in society for how far we've come. And I think one of the pieces that I think is missing is the involvement of men in that change. And I often find that there's almost a separation or a divide between what is a movement and then how we invite men to contribute and participate in creating the change. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on how do we invite men to contribute positively in the learning process on uncomfortable topics, whether it's about marriage or gender roles or domestic violence. What is it that needs to happen in your opinion?
Yeah, Bismillah. I think there's multiple things that we can think about, but there has to be strategy to it. Some of it's going to be very particular to locale and what's going on within a certain community's particular needs. For example, I went to Sri Lanka some years ago and was meeting with internally displaced populations, individuals who had been evicted from their homes by the Tamil Tigers when they were in the government regime. They were the ruling power of the country. And twice they evicted large numbers of Muslims from their home cities, who still till today just live in underdeveloped areas of the country, no infrastructure, etc. And one of the meetings I had was with a group of women who were internally displaced. They were refugees in their own home country. And when we sat down, the first thing that they asked me was, can you tell us something from the Quran and the Hadith that we can tell our husbands so that they stop hitting us? What they need is going to be very different from what somebody might need in another locale or another community. I think fundamentally you can look at this in a few different prongs. One is preemptive education and recognizing that there's opportunity to socialize young men around issues of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, abuse, authority, in a way that recognizes that this is something that is religiously impermissible within our tradition. I think there's also then how you deal with the abuser in and of themselves after the fact, and what is necessary there in not just direct education, but the development of institutions and services. And these two groups go hand in hand. The same way a young person knows that there's a masjid that exists, whether they go or not, right? They know there's a place to pray. They might know that they pray there or their families go there. And they fundamentally understand that this is where we go to be religious. If they see the existence of services like domestic violence shelters, counseling services, intervention services, residential shelters for the abused, they see programming and services. And then with that second group of those who are actually abusive, they see accountability. They see mechanisms and policies things that, for example, help women religiously to get out of abusive relationships, right? Khutbahs that talk directly to the abuser, saying that you're going to stand in front of God one day. And you have to understand that whether or not in a worldly sense you are going to be taken into account, Allah's ultimate accounting of you is going to happen so that they can recognize and understand. And there should be a zero tolerance policy. And then I think the third group that's really important is the one that is not necessarily engaged in the acts of abuse, but they have capacity to do something about it. And so you start to think, well, how do you grow a movement? And how do you do that with a recognition of strategy that isn't just, I put on an event, how when nobody came to it? Like before you do this event, you say to yourself, well, who are the segments we want to engage? And how do we then market to them and adhere to a strategy that makes sense, right? If your organization is looking to create or has created this as an endeavor and as a social service, you answer the question, what does success look like over a year, 3 years, 5 years? And you start to then solicit those who can be actual allies in this kind of work. But there has to be real ihsan at every level. And a big part of it is not that people don't want to do things, but they don't know what to do. And there's not an ease of transition in that kind of gap. And institutionally, I think putting money and funding into the development of some services will be really important. Men do play a critical role in this because of privilege that we have, right? We have, especially in religious spaces, religion tends to be a boys' club. And so men take up a lot of space in religious spaces. So we know there's an active gain to having men be a part of this movement, but that strategy has to be in place so that it's the right type of mindset, that men aren't coming in and just reinventing a cycle of abuse and saying to women, we're just going to tell you how to take care of this, but are really in the true frame of allyship, learning, understanding, leveraging their own power and privilege to be a source of real support. Our religious tradition is filled with examples of the Prophet ﷺ being an individual who spoke out and condemned these kinds of things, interjecting that into the religious discourse so people can now start to reflect and really understand, I think can make a big difference.
There were so many things that you were saying that I thought, what is missing in the Australian context, or what things, where are we in terms of that strategy? And I think where I feel we are is we're at the point where there might be women's shelters and access to those shelters. But I definitely think whenever Muslim men, even Muslim sheikhs, or just people who can see an injustice speak up, whether it's men or women alike, there's definitely been a very strong reaction, and almost like a marrying or blurring of different ideas. So speaking up being blurred with, oh, you must be influenced by Western ideals. And all of a sudden there's a questioning of, well, what was your intention in speaking to that issue? And so I think it makes it really challenging for people who are speaking up and using their power and their privilege and recognizing it and trying to say we're all going to be held accountable, even the ones that are witness or have those spaces to do something. But it could just feel like there's an overwhelming barrage of criticism. So I hear you, and I think we have such a long way to go in that.
But that's what you take, right? You know that that's going to happen, right? So today, you and I, we sit down and we brainstorm. We sit in a room for 3 or 4 hours. We put up sticky notes on the wall or pull out our laptops and we say, we know there's going to be people who say this after we say it. It's not if you have to root it in religion, the Prophet ﷺ stands in front of people and invites them to Islam for the first time, right? Would you believe me if I told you there was an army behind this cliff waiting to attack you? And they say, yes, of course. They know him, Sadiq al-Amin. He is the honest one. He was known as the trustworthy one even before he was known as Nabi. And as he's saying everything, and gives them this insight, remember that I am the one you know to be trustworthy. Then he says, then know this, that I have been sent as a messenger from God. If you were to follow what I teach, there will be good for you in this world and the next. And if not, then Allah will be the judge of what it is that you kind of deal with. And his uncle, Abu Lahab, says to him, right, Taban laka ali hadha jama'atana, that may you be perished. This is why you've gathered us, right? And this is where we get Surah Lahab. And everybody who's listening to the Prophet now listens to this elder authoritative man, and they all return back to their marketplace. The Prophet has to acknowledge this, that he now is in a place where his words are going to be impacted by other people who they don't want to hear this. They don't want to relinquish power. They don't want to get rid of wealth. The challenge that we have is to not just simply say, those people did this. If you know they're going to do it, what I'm saying is, how do you brainstorm effectively to say, well, what do we do then? Not in reaction, or just sit still and say, they're the reason why we can't do it. Because he doesn't say, I just can't do this. Abu Lahab just ruined everything, right? He's got to think, well, what do I do with this as a current reality that allows for him now, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to come back into the same city years later? It takes time, but there's no bloodshed or violence. And the Fath al-Makkah is something that happens with a lot of peace and forgiveness. It takes time to build it up, but you have to acknowledge the obstacles and then say, what are we doing to ready ourselves for them? Yeah. It's a characteristic of abusive, oppressive, inequitous movements. They will create narrative and doubt. They don't want people to, this is what my country does around Black people, right? And anti-Blackness. You have all these advertisements that are going to target people to control what they think. And if this is what supremacy is about, right? It's not just about, and this is what intimate partner violence is about. It's all about control, and not just the physical control, but the physical control being the mechanism for a psychological control. And so you appeal to somebody's heart, but you do it also with your aql to say, what do we do to counter this? We know it's going to happen. What's our proactive mechanism of dealing with it then? You see what I mean?
Yeah. I love what you said about you appeal to someone's heart. I think as I'm getting older, I like to say, as I'm maturing, I'm reconnecting with this concept that has been taught to me in my family unit about my Islam. And one of the things that I observe is just that disconnect from heart. And we know as Muslims, we're taught that faith, love, and joy and belonging to God is something for all of us. But when we look up and we look around us, whether it's the United States and what the social issues are there, the issues locally that are challenging Australian Muslims, it feels like this idea of humanity and compassion and love has been lost in our communities, despite the prophetic teaching about these important qualities. What do you say to people who might be feeling like that, like it's lost and the world is in a state of despair and chaos?
I don't think it's something that impacts Muslims only, right? We have a lot of advancement in the world today. I mean, you're literally sitting on the other side of the world, right? 14 time zones ahead of me, and we're having a conversation, subhanallah, and there's other people who are tuning in. Technology is pretty crazy these days, right? and may Allah make us those who use it in a beneficial way. And to understand that with modernity, there's gain, but with modernity, there can also be a lot of gaps and challenges. And in the prism of modernity, right now, we have a very pervasive form of the illness that's loneliness that has just never existed before. And there becomes now an embrace of individualism in such a way that creates an absence of real compassion and mercy and love, because the egocentricity that modernity calls us towards, that creates this myopic perspective on life, doesn't have us really understand how to engage others with feelings of empathy. There's always a reason why somebody is going through what they're going through, and there's always a reason why we're not really standing with them through their struggle. I think if we were to put it in a Muslim context, I would think about it in a couple of different frames. One, what you said is spot on, right? And I think when you have, or we have rather, a very fiqh-based approach to religion. This is a challenge when you have religion that is ritualistic. The ritual becomes the sense of it being an ends rather than a means to something. And we turn it now as a purely understood external experience alone. And it's about do's and don'ts and the mechanics. Those are there, but it's not taught as a spiritual vehicle. It's taught just as you do this, and then there's no deepening. Like you use the word maturation, which is a really important word. You have organic maturation, physically, emotionally, mentally. I don't eat the same foods as when I was 2, right? I don't wear the same clothes as when I was 5 or 10. My physical matures, my mental capacity matures, my emotion matures on its own. Spiritual maturation needs to happen as well. And one of the things that becomes devoid in a very reductive, externalized mode of engagement on religion is that it stops then talking about things like love and mercy and compassion. Most Muslims that I've spoken to, a generalization I'm comfortable making, they're so uncomfortable hearing about Allah's rahmah or Allah's like love, his being al-wadud or al-latif or ar-rahman or ar-rahim, as-salam. I mean, these are beautiful divine names that Allah has given to himself. And the magnitude of what these mean is not even fathomable to us if we really dig deep. And when I am in the conversations with people and we're talking about only Allah's love or Allah's mercy, somebody always has to interject and say, but don't forget about Allah's wrath. You're talking about Jannah, don't forget Jahannam is there too. And why? Like, why can't you only talk about Jannah sometimes? Why can't you follow the prophetic example where he's telling his people that Allah loves you more than a mother loves his child? He doesn't say to them, and by the way, hell is real too, right? But he just talks about God's mercy and God's love. And I think that absence of ethics and values becomes a challenge just in the world on its own. If you were to ask me what it's rooted in, I would say it's rooted in globalized supremacy. This is what whiteness does. Whiteness calls to egocentricity. It calls towards selfishness. It's very distinct from what the Sunnah calls towards. The Sunnah calls towards beauty, the common good, interdependence, selflessness, real aspects of what is just not just aesthetically beautiful, but also inwardly beautiful. What does it mean to be a good person? And where I think the second part is rooted in it for us as Muslims is on perspective, right? You lose a depth of perspective in the prism of modernity. When Adam alayhi salam is created, and everything is told to prostrate to him. He's fashioned, the ruh is breathed into him, he stands upright. Everything in paradise prostrates except Iblis. And Iblis's act is not in and of itself alone what is problematic, but how he sees this situation is different from everyone else. His perspective is flawed. And the perspective he has is rooted now in what gets carried forward for many of us. You got to sit and think, why did everybody else prostrate? And why did he say no? Why? He even articulates it. I'm of fire, he is of dirt. Why would I do this? He's telling us this is how I see it. But the mode of what he sees is not just through these eyes, but it's through a vision of what's going on inwardly. And that flawed perspective, that limited perspective, is what we see rampant. And I would say a lot of it is because there's not a nurturing of the heart or conversations around, like, what is it that really makes me a whole person? And it's not just a physical self. And when you have just rote memorization, you have emphasis just on the physicality, the mechanics, the do's and don'ts, and nobody's ever sitting down with you and says, who is Allah to you? And not that you just, my 5-year-old can read Surah Ikhlas to you. He might not know what it means, but he's 5. He can memorize it and just spit it out. But what does it mean, right? Who is God to you? And to not be scared to reflect on that and contemplate on it and then bring that forward. And when you don't have these aspects, it's not just the absence of love and compassion and mercy, it's the presence of fear and inhibition and anxiety and negative qualities that come in their place. How can I say something that my friend's father is hitting him or her? What will people say? That's not a conversation rooted in love. That's a conversation rooted in the self. You're thinking about yourself before you're thinking about the other person's need. How can we as a masjid start to comment on these things? How can we build these programs, etc., etc.? When you have now an absence in your own tarbiyah of these things and you acknowledge it, I didn't grow up with this, I got to figure it out. It has then deeper consequences that impact others. And it goes back to this idea, you stand in front of Allah, you're not judged based off of what you did or what you thought of doing. You're also in account of what you had capacity to do, but you simply still did not do it. Who other than us is going to go and build these services and shelters and have these conversations that then compel it? And if my intention is rooted in that love and mercy, then it's going to not be a matter of convenience. I'm just going to do it because the beneficiary and their needs is what's the priority, and that it's the right thing to do. I'm sorry, I know I talk a lot.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Because as you're talking, I was thinking, like, one of the things you mentioned was the absence of ethics and values, and how maybe living in the modern world, it feels a bit messy. I definitely feel like sometimes what is very clear in terms of what I was raised to understand Islam is about, it's kind of upside down in terms of how Muslims are making sense of the world, and sometimes those the upside down happens when you might be engaged in a dialogue and trying to speak to some of these things. And I know one of the areas where I think it's upside down is who I understand or who I was taught the Prophet ﷺ is, and his characteristics and attributes, and what pressure I see men experience, and the outdated ideas of who they're meant to be as men, and the unhealthy masculine stereotypes that are pushed on them, and whether that is sometimes a narrative in mainstream society that comes with a bit of Islamophobia towards Arab and Muslim men in our context being hyper masculine and more violent than the average other man, or it's a real experience in terms of the double standard that I live with as a Muslim woman within the Muslim community. Like, men being stoic or men being promiscuous is all right because he'll come upstanding, but women's reputation, it's a lot more fragile. You know, men don't really have an expectation, I think, socially around child rearing that's very much pushed onto women, and with chores, that not being their domain. Sometimes I'm like, whose idea is that? Because that wasn't the value system or even the stories that were narrated to me as a child. And so it feels very upside down. And when you're talking about that absence of ethics and values, I feel like I see it. It's all around us, and it can feel very challenging to have the words to describe it. And I think the only words I found going through university was the literature and the books and the ideas that you learn in those institutions, but sometimes they're not they're divorced of your deen. There's no marrying that knowledge to my understanding of Islam and then finding, you know, like, how does this live together? It's like a very academic, and then there's the spiritual stuff. And I definitely felt I was in crisis as a young adult, trying to make sense of it all. So I really appreciate, even if you think they're long answers, the answers you're giving, because maybe other people who are trying to make sense of it can take that away. I'm wondering, Imam, whether there is a conversation happening in the US. There's one happening here about a term called coercive control. So coercive control refers to a pattern of controlling behaviors that create an unequal power dynamic in a relationship. So these behaviors give the perpetrator power over their partner, making it difficult for them to leave. Coercive control is a form of emotional abuse that can cause psychological harm. And one of the things when I hear people on talk shows and academics talk about it, and experts talk and use this new language or evolved language to how we understand domestic violence, I think I don't even know how to begin to explain that in a cultural or religious community who is still trying to create the understanding between how we respond. We're not quite there with the institutions and the strategies, and the whole space is evolving, and I think there's a disconnect.
Yeah, well, I think what coercive control seeks to interject for individuals is a recognition. Let me take a step back. It's a very like Islamic concept, right? We understand meaning through the names of things. And so the more we expand on our vocabulary and understand constructs, it gives us a deeper insight, right? وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Adam was taught the names of everything. That's how we know stuff, you know. So I can, my children are 5 and 8. When you're a little kid, on average in a day, you're learning, you know, another like dozen words, like new words, right? Nose, eyes, whatever it is, and you start to deepen in your understanding because you can now express a little bit more differently. What coercive control interjected into an Australian media system is doing that's beneficial is giving people insight that helps them understand that abuse is not just physical, right? So words have meanings, but we can also give them our own meaning. And so you can really easily turn off the idea that abuse is happening around you, or you are even abusing somebody by making a claim that says, well, I don't raise my hand on anybody, right? I don't hit anyone. But abuse is not just physical. It is physical, and it's wrong, and it's haram, and we shouldn't mince words about that. But you can also have emotional abuse. You can have sexual abuse. You can have financial abuse. You can have spiritual abuse. We can go through a whole gamut of forms of abuse that exist that still have that fundamental aspect of abuse that's about control, that's about taking the power dynamic and maintaining it in that abusive format, right? So how does this apply, for example, to financial abuse? You know, you're a woman that's trying to get out of an abusive relationship, and the husband says to the wife, well, you don't have a job, you don't have any money, all the credit cards are in my name, the bank accounts are in my name, and you're not going to be able to do anything. They're going to hold money over you and like food and other types of basic needs. And then it has an impact. It's like a lot. What am I going to do? I'm going to go out in the world. I don't speak the language. It's not my culture, etc., etc. They don't like Muslims here. What's going to happen? You get sucked back in because you don't have money, and that financial abuse is being held over you, right? You can see this for people who have immigration issues, for example. They get married and they come to Australia. I don't know what the processes of gaining a visa or citizenship in your country. In my country, there's a lot of women who will marry someone, come from their country here, and they're now on a pathway to getting their residential status, etc. And their husbands will refuse to like sign papers or do this or do that, and that's a form of abuse, right?
Yeah.
Spiritual abuse. Parents do this to their kids all the time. We can do whatever we want to you because parents are always right and we are never wrong, and you just have to do what we say, or like God is going to hate you, right? I have conversations not just with teenagers and people in their 20s, people who are 30, 40 years old, and they're struggling to make decisions because in their socialization, they grew up with family that made them believe having their own ideas was somehow a problem religiously, that Allah was going to automatically send you to hell if your father or mother was unhappy. And then by extension, they'd say, we're only happy if you do every single thing, right? I had a young woman who talked to me yesterday who said her father threatened to divorce his mother if the girl's older sister didn't marry who he wanted her to. Another young woman reached out saying that my father told me he will like hurt me more, and he's already physically hurting me because I don't want to marry someone that he wants me to from someplace else. These are things that are not rarities. They happen quite regularly, and they're not in a vacuum. People will then say, what has it been like for me for so many years of my life? And now the cycle perpetuates itself because you carry trauma that was given to you from somebody else. And you can only give to others what it is that you possess in the first place. So if you don't know what the psychological impact is from these types of relationships, and so understanding words like coercive control in relation to words like domestic violence, intimate partner violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, is to give people a broader understanding of it. Individually, you then start to think, well, where does it impact me? Or how is it that I might be impacting somebody else through this? And not just in a sphere that says, well, I'm not hitting someone, so it must not be abusive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm wondering, with all those different stories you just shared with us, and you see the different types of control exercised in different types of relationships, how do we begin to address an issue like that beyond a conversation like this? You know what?
Yeah. I mean, we have in our religion, we have what's called the fard ain, the individual obligations, right? Your prayer is your prayer. My prayer is my prayer. We're supposed to pray our prayer, but no one can pray it for us. I can only individually pray my prayers, right? There's certain ritual that is individually obligatory upon us. And then you have that juxtaposed to what's called the communal obligation, the fard kifaya. The quintessential example that's utilized in books of fiqh is the janazah prayer. Somebody dies in a community, so long as there's one person that knows how to wash the body, shroud the body, pray over the body, bury the body, and the rights of the deceased are honored, then the whole community is absolved of responsibility. But if nobody knows how to do it, then the entire community bears the burden of responsibility towards that individual who passed away. In our tradition, like social services are the same thing, right? You have means, then you deal with the means. So if there's not a community that's wealthy or financially well to do, etc., that's different. But most Muslim communities globally have individuals that are doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs. And this isn't from the standpoint of wealth, but it's from the standpoint of building interdisciplinary groups to build out institutions. A religious scholar is not going to know how to build a nonprofit. That's not their training. They can add to the table, and it's an important voice, but it definitely isn't the only voice, nor does it have to be the decision-making voice. But you sit down with people who understand the various aspects of building an institution, and then you build it. You have a vision, a mission statement, a sensible revenue model, and you start with something and you grow it. So if in Australia, you decided with people, we're going to build something as a service, and you start with just one apartment that has one bed in it, and you can afford to provide shelter for one woman at a time who has a man in her life that has no idea what it means to be a man. You're maybe not providing for 1,000, but you're at least still providing for one. And then maybe in 10 years, that turns to 10 people at a time. And then in 20 years, that's now 100 people. But there's patience with the growth, but there's strategy also. There's a value to the graphic designer, the lawyer, the entrepreneur, the nonprofit manager, the social worker, the counselor, the religious scholar, the security person, whoever, sitting down together and saying, how do we build this effectively? Again, with real ihsan. And that's what we have to do, right? And in the last however many like years, I've been blessed to do, the community work that I do. There hasn't been a week in like 15, 16 years where at least one woman, if not upwards of a dozen, has reached out. Just in the last 2 days, I've talked to 3 women about something like this, right? I just told you about 2 of them that reached out. It's like a regular experience. And so in socializing the community that I serve now, we have the conversations, we talk about it. In 2018, 2 people came to my office. We just started a DV agency in our community, its own nonprofit. It's called Pillars of Peace. And it started with 2 individuals coming to me in my office saying, you talk about this stuff a lot. We want to build something. And I said, great. And we sat, and for months, we just planned. We put things on paper. We then put a call out to the community for volunteers. There's no money at that point to fill gaps in what we weren't able to do. And then plan some more. In Ramadan of 2019, we launched the first campaign under that DV agency to acquire funds to purchase and renovate what would become an emergency confidential shelter for women and children who are survivors of abuse. And we thought it would take 6 months to a year to raise $700,000. And in 10 days, we raised $1 million, alhamdulillah, wow, from over 9,000 people, which is then not a lot of people giving $10,000, $50,000 checks. It's a lot of people giving $1, $5, $10, because that love is there that we talked about before. That compassion is there, and a recognition of how we're part of something together. We purchased a building. COVID kind of put stuff in, a different circumstance. But as things open up here, alhamdulillah, and I pray that inshallah, Allah grants you all ease, and anyone who is suffering due to COVID in your country, in your community. But we were able to purchase a building here last October, and we're now hiring 4 people to work for the agency, building out financial empowerment programs, building out the grounds for helping women to get religious divorces who are in abusive situations, doing other similar work. And if you say like, why? Well, I don't believe God gave me a platform to be self-serving. And I'm just trying to like do what I can. And I'm looking for people who want to also build, because that's just what we need to do. But, you know, to answer your question, it takes time to get to that place and a lot of patience to recognize like you're working towards something. And so it's and is it replicable? Like, yeah, like anybody can do it. You just have to have the patience to sit down and just think and like plan accordingly. You see?
I hear you. You mentioned just then that one of the challenges is when someone experiences abuse, they carry that trauma. And I would say that, I mean, globally, I feel like we're all carrying trauma because we see so much that probably no other generation saw that level of explicit violence. It's in front of you, it's on your phones, you don't really miss it. But I hear what you're saying about intergenerational trauma and that cycle of abuse. What prophetic reminders do we need to hear so that we're in a process of healing our communities?
I mean, healing is just what Islam is about, right? If
Mm.
Islam is not about healing, like what is it about then? You know, healing the individual, healing the community, healing society, and being a source of hope for people. And you know, this is like just what the Prophet ﷺ did for people. I mean, literally, the companions would say, Ya Rasulullah, uh, Inna idha ra'inaka raqqat qulubana, that when we see you, Messenger of God, our hearts become soft,
Mm.
right? But his presence has that healing factor, and it gives people that sense of, you know, softness in our tradition isn't meek, but softness is kind of contrasted to hardness. The hard heart is what the Quran says is like the dead heart, the
Mm.
heart that isn't awake or alive, right? May Allah protect us from hearts that are like this. The
Amen.
soft heart, the tender heart is the aspiration that the Quran posits to its reader you want to have and strive for. And now the people who follow the messenger, they're saying just seeing you makes us feel soft inside. And his presence is comforting.
Yeah.
His presence is bringing ease. And there is now the extrapolation of meaning from the Quran only through the personification of that Quran in this man's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his coming and the Quran sending is about expansiveness, not restrictiveness. It's meant to create life and invigorate, not be suffocating. And you can just pick up the book and read any of it and see that this is meant to be a transformational text in that way, where you can find on a practical level things that we hear from when we're children. But to just think about it, what does it mean that the poor, the destitute, those that were of the wrong gender, the wrong race, the wrong class, were the first followers of this religion? What does it mean that the Prophet ﷺ did not barter away like any of what was important to him because of them, when the elite and the nobility started to come saying, well, give us unique space here? And that sense of, when we're taught like to be a good Muslim, is when you walk into a room, for example, you know, people are reminded of Islam or God. I think it has to be qualified, because ours is not just a religion that says, well, remember God exists, because the kid who's petrified of the father that beats him might be thinking about God, but not the way that our book tells us to think about God.
Yeah.
You want to be able to walk into a room and engage with individuals is not that you have to bear the burden of being responsible to show the whole world Islam always. You can just be yourself. But when you're building relationships with people around religion, the kind of Islam you want to be inspired by is somebody who reminds you not just of Allah's existence, but that Allah is Rahman, that Allah is Rahim, a God of mercy, a God of compassion, a God to have hope in, a God to draw strength from. This is what the Prophet ﷺ is offering to his people, a recognition that there's something that's much bigger in store for us, and Allah is always with you. And so individually, I'm not saying go be that person, because like, how do I do that? But on the first step, go build relationships with people who remind you about the divine in that way, who give you comfort when you are engaged in religion. If you're thinking about this individually, you also think about it institutionally, right? Don't support places that mistreat women. Don't donate to masjids that don't honor women. Don't donate to spaces that have individuals that make problematic statements or refuse to make other kinds of statements. And you start to think for yourself, well, why am I supporting these spaces if I know that they are a part of the challenge, right? You go to the masjid, and the masjid, the idea of creating a house of God is that it's meant to draw attentiveness to God, not the house. And when you walk into the house of God and it's got big chandeliers and all, that's fine. I'm not saying that's a problem. Fundamentally, it's still supposed to, though, be about bringing you closer to Allah. And if it's not, like, why are you supporting this space, right? In the same way, individually, you have to care for your heart and say, I'm responsible for connecting to hearts that are uplifting and gentle and tender. So too, I'm responsible for being in spaces that also elicit and invoke that same sense of value, right? The Prophet ﷺ builds a masjid, the Jami', and in Arabic, the word Jami' also means masjid, but it means inclusive. It means comprehensive, right? It appreciates diversity. Nobody built a space like this in Arabia the way the Prophet ﷺ did. Anybody could come in, you know? And inclusivity is not just a diversity checkbox. We have Black people, there's women here, and there's the poor and whatever. Inclusivity is about also appreciating and recognizing a value add from these people, right? And so if you go to spaces where there's people that you turn to for religion, but they clearly don't value you as a woman, they don't value people of different races or cultures, you'd want to rethink not why are they in that position, but why do I strive to build a relationship to God through them? Why are they the means that I have chosen? And if it doesn't make sense, then why do you keep doing it? You're not going to find another need being fulfilled through something when you're fulfilling it through something else, whether it's doing it well or not. And so these men and women, radiallahu anhum ajma'een, they found solace when the person that represented God to them walked into a room. And there's a lot of people, they might not be the most famous people or the most well-known people or the most, they might not even talk so much. It's just people who, when you're around them, they remind you of gentleness and compassion. They remind you of love. They remind you of these things. And then you say, I'm going to purposefully build relationships with these type of people. And then you start to take those characteristics on and you start to give that to the world that really needs it for themselves as well. You see?
Mm. I want to ask one final question. SubhanAllah, I don't know how the time flies, but it has been an hour already. One of the things I think about all the time is socialization. And I deeply appreciate your questions, because I think they're things the audience can ask themselves and reflect on in their own time. I think we have a responsibility, though, especially when it comes to children, around how we educate our children about a range of things. And one of the things I see is that we stuff them with things like shame and cultural expectations that reinforce norms or behaviors that have existed maybe for a long time. And it's what you were saying earlier about not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to, what will people say? And so we don't even ever get to choose. You're almost made to feel like you can't question who your family follow, for example, in terms of religious scholarship. You don't get to choose the masjid because you're going along with your parent. You don't get to choose if you're attending an Islamic school and which one. So there's not really much choice when you're young. It's kind of whatever the adults say goes. And so if there is not an openness to different ideas, or even a willingness to challenge some of the unhealthy behaviors or the harmful behaviors within our community, how do we play a role in better educating our children?
So, a child becomes heavily reliant upon their parents, and may Allah make us all good parents. And sometimes what we learn as parents is just through our subconscious, right? Learning, I think, for many Muslims requires unlearning as a first step, right? To remove and think out, well, what are my core beliefs and what are they fashioned off of? And core beliefs, not just what I claim them to be, right? Belief in Allah's angels, messengers, that's a different conversation. I'm saying the core beliefs that are within me cognitively that I might be conscious or unconscious of, and what of them are positive and what of them are negative, right? Do I believe I'm worthy of love? Do I believe I'm worthy of success? Do I believe that I'm worthy of, happiness? Or does my core belief say, I'm not worthy of happiness? No one will ever accept me. I'm ugly. And it can inform how we see reality. Our core beliefs then become what we process reality through as a means of affirming those core beliefs, right? I'll give you an example. Anecdotally, many people use the example of the circus elephant, that the elephant as a child is tied up by a rope by the circus masters. And as it's growing and reared in the circus, it continues to be tied in this way. And now when it's reached adulthood, it's a massive creature, but it's still tied by the same rope as when it was a child. And from the outside, you can say this beast can easily rip this rope apart. And it's from the outside looking that creates now a challenge, because this beast is not simply tied by this rope physically. There's a psychological shackling that is holding it back now through its socialization. Yeah. And that's where, for many of us, we got to think about, what are the ropes that are holding us back? What are the ropes that are pulling us forward? The Prophet ﷺ would regularly tell the children in his life that he loved them. He would tell the companions in his life that he loved them. He would tell everybody he loves them, right? I'm here with you. I'm in this with you. There was positivity to his relation, even his relationship with God. Why do you stand into the late hours of the night in prayer, right? You are forgiven, right? أَفَلَا أَكُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Should I not be a grateful servant? It's a positive based relationship, right? He's, not, I'm afraid of God, but I want to show God how thankful I am, right? There's a value there that's positive. If you grow up your whole life and somebody tells you you're stupid, why wouldn't you believe that you're stupid, right? If somebody tells you that you're ugly, why wouldn't you believe you're ugly? It's not in a vacuum. You grow up in a society that's racist, Why wouldn't you start to develop a sense of impact through stereotypes placed on you, self-loathing, shame, guilt, whatever it is? Young people go through this in a lot of different ways, and it can be formulated also in a realm of positivity. The control that we have is only of ourselves. In abusive situations, coercive control, our religion tells us we're not accountable because now choices are being forced upon us. And that's something that Allah says, if you are forced into the circumstance, then what can you do, right? That's where it's at. And it's literal, right? A woman told me some time ago how her grandmother forced her to marry her male cousin because she came down into the kitchen when they were visiting relatives once. And this young girl in her late teens said, my grandmother took a knife, put it against her own neck, and said, if you don't marry your cousin right now, I will kill myself, right? Emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. There's elements of various forms of abuse. This young person is going to carry this image in her head. It's going to impact trust and love. And then she has to make a choice. But what choice is she really making? It's not, do I marry this person or not? The choice is, like my grandmother, do I keep her alive or not? Right?
Yeah.
Those kinds of experiences are real. So what is the kid learning? And so not doing wrong is not the same as doing right. If you are not hitting, yelling, screaming, abusing, great, mashallah. But you have to actively also be validating, like supporting, nurturing, cultivating, caring, and expressing that in words and in actions. It's going to vary from culture to culture, but it's really hard to be a young person these days. And the ability to process adult like when you abuse a child, you're also forcing adult emotions into a developing heart that's not ready to hold those things. Mm-hmm. And what they need is like someone to laugh and love and care and show them that it's okay to make mistakes. So you might have to deal with your own trauma. You might have to acknowledge the pain that's been put into you by other people and go through a healing process. And I'm sorry for anybody who's been hurt by others, right? May Allah grant you the healing that you're in need of. But passing it on now is not going to be the solution. Standing against it and taking advantage of resources at your disposal so that it doesn't go into the next generation. A guy came to see me who was like 40 something years old, and he said, you know, I don't talk to my family anymore. My father abuses me a lot growing up. I just don't want a relationship with them. And we went to see his father, 70 something year old man, and they're talking, and the 40-year-old son is, you know, letting out all of what it is that he's experienced. The elderly father is getting flustered. His face is turning red. He then starts to cry. And then what he blurts out is, the way that I show you I love you is by hitting you. And the son looks at me and says, what can I do with this? And I said, I'm not justifying what your father is saying to you at all or how he's treated you. But if you're really looking for understanding, then recognize your father's difficulty is not in affirming his treatment of you as wrong. But if he acknowledges that, he's going to have to unpack and deal with his own dissonance towards his older brother that used to hit him and his father that used to hit him, and how when they would hit him, the way he would reconcile it in his head when he would ask, why are people who are caring about me doing this? As a young person saying, well, they must be doing it because they care about me and they love me. Because the alternatives are what? And that self-blame and self-pity becomes consequential. And now he's just passing that trauma on to somebody else, right? And so if we've been mistreated, you stand up and you say, what are the ropes that are holding me back? For your own sake, more than anybody else, you deserve a life of contentment. Yeah. And then you start to think about, okay, how am I building that into other relationships?
I hear a very strong call to action around breaking the cycle, and how we do that can be through the metaphor that you're sharing with us, through a conscious commitment to unlearning. And to unlearn, we at least have to acknowledge how it is that we exist in the world right now, and also to commit to working on our own healing process so that we can really exist in the world in a better place or in a better way. Imam Khalid, I really want to thank you for the insightful discussion and your time. It was an honor to have this conversation. I am sure that the audience is taking away different things as I am. SubhanAllah, I was having a chuckle as I facilitated a program this morning about my own state and my relationship with fear and love, and the anxiety that the fear gives me as a Muslim. You know, it's always this Muslim guilt complex. And I was talking about how sometimes I go to sleep and I'm like, this could be it. You know, so I sleep anxious and I wake up really happy, and all my friends are like, why do you wake up so energized? It's like, because I made it another day. SubhanAllah. So you've touched on something that I think so many Muslims really struggle to reconcile because of the way we're socialized. So I know I've left this discussion with a lot. So thank you for that. We look forward to further collaboration. Please, if you want to know more about Imam Khalid Latif, check out the Islamic Center of New York City. And he has his own page as well. You can find him on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thank you to everyone who joined us live, and for all of the people who will watch this back later. I encourage you to give us your feedback in the survey that I'm about to drop, and feel free to visit our website, which is lma.org.au, to find out more about our work and hear more conversations like this. Jazakallah khair, and have a good night.